We've got a team of folks that are both internationally known and also very, very aware of Northwest Arkansas and connected to Northwest Arkansas. And very briefly, before I introduce the MHNA team, the Mumford Hart and Ashley team, I want to introduce Jason Miller, who is the executive director of the Arkansas Philharmonic Orchestra and has been since 2015. And I don't know if you all know Jason, but I mean, he has really seen an incredible amount of change in the APO. And I know that he's a team player, but a lot of that is because of his drive and his vision, especially with their professional orchestra and their youth orchestra, and moving it through a really difficult couple years with COVID, and how they've been able to pivot so beautifully. So Jason, can you just tell us briefly how on earth you know these MHNA folks real quick?
Hi, everyone. Thank you for having me. This is a very interesting story. I was just like most nonprofits in Northwest Arkansas. I finally scraped up enough money to be able to pay for some advertising. And we had only done a little bit of advertising before on NPR. And well, actually, one time we actually bought a billboard. I don't know if you ever saw that on 49, but that was pretty cool. I still have that vinyl. It's gonna be an amazing slip and slide one day. Maybe I'll bring it to happy hour. But anyway, I realized, that I wasn't getting the impact that I wanted from my advertising dollars. And I received a little bit of money from the Walton Family Foundation for some marketing support, which in my mind was advertising. And I was introduced to Michael Pedler at the time from a mutual friend, and he was Canadian, and so I thought he was supposed to be nice. And I was telling him, that I have some money and for advertising, and realized that he was from an agency world background, and it was like, how should I spend this money? And he quickly put on the brakes and said, well, what is your brand, and what audience are you trying to reach, and asking all those questions that I know I'm supposed to answer. But again, I'm one of one, really. I have a couple of part-time people who help with programming support and stuff, so I just kind of get caught in that cycle of doing whatever I need to do to put out the next fire. And I hadn't answered all of those questions. And so Michael was very gracious in spending a lot of time with me to pull all of this amazing stuff out of my head that I knew was there, but I didn't know how to unlock it. And he created this incredible brand deck, and then we were off to the races. But then he surprised me by saying, oh, now you need this entire team. And I have them all, and they're all Canadian. And they're all much nicer than he is. And so then I met, he did it in such a wonderful way of kind of introducing me to Tina, which is the really sweet Canadian that is very good at keeping me focused and in line of what the next tasks are. And then to Matthew and Stephen on helping with creative and copy. And then I've just met Ed, but I always knew Ed was in the background. And so I have been working with these people for well over a year now, all virtual, and it's been fantastic. And so I can't wait for them to kind of walk you through a snippet of what we did in the beginning.
And what I love is that Jason's here as this voice of experience of what it did for the organization to take time to focus, to take the energy to focus on their messaging and who APO is. And so we'll be hearing from the MHNA team soon more about that. But first, before I introduce them further, I'd like to hear from you all and understand a bit better about who's in the room. So if you could please put in the chat which organization you are affiliated with, or if you are an artist or creative, please tell us a little bit about yourself, your practice. So go ahead and put that in the chat now. Hey, Emily from Mount Sequoia, glad you're here again. Brianna from the Jones Center, welcome. Good to see you here. Yeah, just put those in the chat. And I am also curious to know who considers themselves to be a medium organization. Put a 1 in the chat, please. If you consider yourself to be a medium organization, medium-sized nonprofit. If you consider yourself a small nonprofit organization, please put a 2 in the chat, just so we can kind of get a sense of who's in the room. If you consider yourself a large organization, put a 3 in the chat. See how I did that? Got to keep paying attention here. All right, great. Let's see, thank you. All right, so now that we know a little bit more about who's in the room, let's also learn more about who this MH&A team is. So Michael, I'll pick on you first. So Michael is the less nice Canadian, according to Jason, and he and so
he's the most direct Canadian out of any of them, and it's only with Jason because he kind of needs it.
It's true.
Well, you know, this is not in his bio, but it's interesting hearing about all the projects that Michael Pedler has been a part of. And when we were first talking on the phone, he said, I had to figure out how to give meaning to Dove soap. And so he has a lot of experience thinking about how to help a lot of brands like Walmart, Drug Mart, and Safeway, IBM, Ford, to work to think about the meaning of their brand. And so Michael is a trusted leader with a very successful track record, just leading a lot of global brand initiatives. So he has so much experience with communications and marketing. And then, but what's cool is that there's that mixture of the global, and then he knows a lot about Northwest Arkansas. So we'll learn more about his role, not just as the brand chair of the APO, but also just your passion for community development here in Northwest Arkansas. Ed, I'll pick on you next. So Ed, he's also from Canada, from Toronto, and we're so glad to have you here, Ed. He runs his own consultancy, Brand Interrogations, and also has worked with many, many different partners like Sick Kids Foundation, Artscape, Dana's Launchpad, Clean Sheet, CIBC, Imperial Premium Financing Services. And he has done so much good sitting on the board of the Account Planning Group of Canada, mentors at-risk youth, young adults, and volunteers. So wide amount of experience. And as Michael said, Ed is the strategy guy. So if you couldn't tell from just those snippets of his experience, lots of great wisdom and logistics and organization, but long-term strategy. Tina comes to us with over 20 years of marketing experience, broad range of experience in CRM and growth marketing. And so like Jason was saying, Tina is the one that makes the steps a reality, makes those action steps and keeps people on track. And she launched her own consulting firm, Leslieville Digital, and really just has so much of the experience of the on the ground work with small businesses as well as large enterprise and nonprofit organizations. So we've got a dream team here. And am I missing anybody else? That Matthew's here as well. Can you wave and say hello? And Matthew, I have had the least time talking to. So Matthew, can you just give maybe just a snippet about yourself and your experience? I'm going to hand it over to you.
Sure, I'd be happy to. My experience is largely the same as Michael's, just a little longer, I think. It's been advertising, but always in creative. And I have to be clear about this, is that everybody that works in advertising is creative. Everybody's the right brain thinker. I just happen to get to do the fun part of making it. I've worked on many of the same clients that Michael worked on, IBM being a principal one, Ford I worked on for years. And when you're working on big, brands like that, it's very easy to lose the North Star of brand purpose. Which means you just have to be more vigilant, not unlike you have to be with a nonprofit or smaller. But I've worked on many categories, pretty much all of them, many channels, pretty much all of them. And I'm also a Canadian centered in Toronto. So I am not in the same room with Ed and Tina. So just letting you know.
Thank you, Matthew. All right. So without any further ado, Ed, I'm going to hand it over to you to really give us some foundational understanding about why a brand is so important. And then please, again, everybody, put your questions in the chat and we will get to you. So let's be enlightened.
Great. Can everybody see that? Okay. Although I can't, which is kind of unusual. Let's see. Okay, well, I guess it is what it is. That's strange. It's completely gone from my screen, but never mind. Thank you. Yes, I am Canadian, but you can also tell that I am not necessarily born and bred in Canada. I'm actually via Texas, believe it or not. And before Texas, I was in the UK. So that's my kind of background. But I'm here just today just to kind of share with you our thinking around how we understand brands and how we make sure that the clients we work with are talking coherently and concisely and most efficiently about their brand. And I love the subject for this panel, which is, wait, who are we? Because that's kind of core to what we actually try and do, which is to try and focus your communications on exactly who you are. There are possibly 3 steps to getting to concise messaging. And the first is really understanding your brand, understanding who you are, understanding what you do well, understanding who you do it for, and understanding why you do it. If you can't answer those questions succinctly and easily, then you probably have to pause and you really can't go any further until you can answer those questions. Because if you don't have a sense, a really good understanding of who you are, you aren't quite sure where you're supposed to be going. It's a bit like taking a journey, but you don't have a map, you don't know where you're starting from, you don't know where you're supposed to be going, and you aren't quite sure what mode of transportation you're going to take to get there. But by understanding who your brand is, you actually you can start thinking about plans, routes, ways that you actually might want to get there. So it's a core part of this journey, which is exactly who are you. And when we talk about a brand, we're talking about more than just the product itself. So a brand isn't the actual physicality of a service or of a product. It's not a slogan or a logo, or an ad. I like to use the example of Pepsi versus Coke. I'm a big Pepsi fan. I worked on Pepsi for, gosh, 10, 12 years. So I know the cola category really well. And if you think about Coke versus Pepsi, physically, the real kind of tangible stuff is identical. It's a carbonated soft drink. They both got a cola flavor. They're both refreshing. That's pretty much it. It's only when you go beyond those, beyond those physical issues that you start realizing that they're quite different, because they've managed to build very different images around the carbonated cola flavored beverage. Coke is very much about all American culture versus Pepsi, which is about the culture of now. And if you remember back in the day, it was all about pop music and bringing in the latest pop phenom to show you how they really were on the cutting edge of culture. Coke prides itself and reinforces that it is the original. It was the first big one, and it's all for not changing. It's like a stake in the ground, Coke. It does not change. It's one of these things you can count on. Versus Pepsi, which is about the next generation. So not the original. In fact, the opposite. It's what's next. And Coke has always taken a approach of let's unite the world, versus Pepsi, which has tried to be let's ignite the world through different causes, different ways of doing things. Two very different brands, but actually the same physical product. I doubt you can even tell the difference if you tasted them, but they're very different feelings to them. And that's what a brand is. It's all those associations, perceptions, attitudes, experiences, images that we have around a service or an organization or a product. But it includes both those rational things and those emotional image feeling things. And that makes it different to the physical product because the brand exists in people's heads. It doesn't exist, I mean, it's obviously the physicality is part of it, but the actual richness and the brandiness of it exists in people's actual minds, all those associations, perceptions. Now, why is this important? Why having a good understanding of your brand, who you are, what you're good at, why is that of benefit to you guys? Well, there's a ton of benefits to really understanding your brand. The first is it allows you to differentiate yourself from organizations that might seem similar to you. In the same way Pepsi and Coke feel very different, it's the brand that makes them different. If you truly understand your brand, it actually makes it easier for you to make core strategic decisions. Should we invest in this initiative? Should we have that event? Should we hire this person? Because you have your brand as like a guiding light, a North Star, a magnetic pull that will direct you to make the right decisions. If it's something that people can get deeply engaged in, it also generates deeper employee engagement because people like what you stand for. It should inspire stakeholders, people who you rely on for your board or donors. If they buy into what you stand for, they are going to be inspired. It makes decision-making simpler because you kind of know what you're trying to do. Very important benefit is that when you have a strong brand, it justifies asking for more stuff. Pepsi and Coke can charge a premium when it comes to their beverages versus buying the no-name brand that's probably very similar because they have a brand and people are emotionally connected to that. And it builds trust and loyalty and relationships because you're talking to both the rational side, but also the emotional side of people. At the end of the day, your brand really should be an articulation, a reflection. Sorry, everything you do should be a reflection or an articulation of your brand. Whether it's an email you're sending out, an email blast, whether it's a poster, a mailer, whether it's how you design your website, how you hire people, they should all be an articulation of what your brand stands for. And that's why brands are kind of important because they can add so much richness to who you are. Great example is the work that Michael and did Jason with the APO. This is the kind of one of the ways we talk about a brand. And the APO, it's kind of at its core is this sense of unexpected beauty with this purpose of connecting communities. And in its positioning statement, and I'm not going to go through all of this, it says that, and I love this, APO is the only arts-based charitable organization that uses art to connect with people where they are. They do that by introducing art in unexpected ways. Matthew, do you want to chat a bit about the creative that came out of that kind of brand blueprint?
And I'll just add a little bit of flavor to that, because when we say we are the only one, there's a bit of like a PS there, and it's, you know, the right time, the right tone, the right art format, because we do work to partner with other organizations to help bring the APO to life. And if, you know, let's just say the musical format isn't for you, well, then we'll partner with the dance-based organizations, and we do try to activate. And there's a bit of storytelling behind everything we produce to make it a little bit more accessible. So when we say where people are, we mean right time, right tone, right place, and right music art format. It gives us that flexibility to be able to do that.
So the creative, Matthew, are you off mute? I can't tell from my screen.
He's not.
Here we are. There we go. That's
Great.
So, I mean, when we do things like this, and Ed has done all his upfront strategic work, and Michael and everybody, what we're tasked to do in building creative is largely akin to alchemy. We're taking a lot of raw material from strategy and, as you saw, brand purpose and brand vision and things like that. And we are meant to turn it into something of marketing value. And what that means is we're supposed to tell this story in a way that's compelling. I mean, I use the analogy of, oddly, the Bible. The Bible's a storybook, and it was meant to tell morals and stories and things like that to get people to sit up and take notice. And that's what our job was. And in this case, what we were doing from all that work was developing a story of how unique Northwest Arkansas is within the grand region of what I would call the APO catchment area. Anybody that would be inclined to go and experience the APO, we want them to understand that you're not going to find anything quite like it anywhere else in Northwest Arkansas. So that's where we came up with this, with our brand line, Northwest Arkansas Set to Music, because it's so much more than just, music in this place. As you can, I'll just read this little blurb here. Evident by the musicians, their repertoire, and even the venues in which they play, the APO is not merely an orchestra based in Northwest Arkansas, it is an orchestra that embodies Northwest Arkansas. So, I mean, that's also kudos to Jason and all his team in bringing in local artists and promoting local artists, and not just the artists themselves who are playing the music, but composers from, Arkansas, and promoting them, as well as the effort of putting the music in places and venues where, as Michael and Ed have already said, putting it in places where we make it's already accessible, but we make it almost uber accessible. We'll meet people on bike trails on occasion. We'll set up pop-ups in markets and things like that. So that's all part of the brand. Not to mention that even just the voice of the brand is very approachable. Almost, it even touches on, I'll use the word small I or lowercase I, irreverent. There's a bit of spice to the flavor, and that makes it a little more approachable in that you engage people by using language that might not be necessarily associated with classical music. So we take all that and we build on it. Visually, I mean, what we're trying to do here is obviously showcase the music, the musicians, but also showcase what it is about Northwest Arkansas that there is to celebrate, and there is a lot. So all in all, that's what the brand really does. It kind of puts APO at the hub of this wonderful, unique place, and as a catalyst for enjoying that place.
I just wanted to jump in real quick that all comes from me basically saying, I want to be the black sheep of the orchestra world. Like they took that and they created all of this, but we also want to be an important part of the fabric of the community. And so then we get this curtain with, Cooper Chapel or Thorn Crown or whatever, and the musicians. But I love the cheeky nature of all of the copy, that we're getting for our emails and our ads, and people are really responding to that.
And just one other point, following up on Jason, that this idea of Northwest Arkansas set to music is no longer something that, say, the symphony orchestra can say. This is our position. We are Northwest Arkansas set to music. So now we have created a brand in which we own, and of course we have to live up to. And I think in terms of there's music schedule, and again the people they feature, and just their vision and Jason's vision, we stand by that. We very much can stand by that line that we are Northwest Arkansas set to music.
And I'll just add one more thing quickly. That's sort of the creative manifestation, but the way that we internalize the brand as well is, I mean, we even bring it into the product. And when I say product, I mean, every time we perform, there's a checklist that Jason absolutely hates me for creating. But when it comes to programming, it has to meet sort of these 10 criteria that we lay out that are fully aligned with the brand. So it shouldn't just be, you can't talk about something you're not living. So when you use this brand strategy that you create, it has to inform your product, it has to inform your service, it's got to inform what you do every day in your programming, and then it allows you permission to speak about that creatively. Otherwise it's just kind of empty. So it goes outwards and inwards.
I just want to echo that as a nonprofit, somebody in the nonprofit world, I was constantly under pressure to just go from event to event to event and not think intentionally about branding and about our voice. It was just about getting invitations out to the next event. But what I just heard Michael say and affirmed from Jason and the rest of the team is that it's more than just a visual brand. It's an anchor point. It's something to continuously do a gut check to. Is this consistent with our brand? Is this choice for this programming consistent with our brand that we've chosen? So just wanted to echo that, because I think that is a concept that is undervalued or unknown in a lot of nonprofit circles. So back to you, Ed. Thanks for letting me soapbox there for a minute.
You're on mute, Ed.
You're on mute, Ed.
Sorry, can you still see my screen?
Yes.
So, what I like about this slide is that Michael was actually talking about this, and Jason as well was kind of mentioning this. A powerful brand has legitimacy. Everything you do is proof of that purpose. It's that checklist that Michael forces Jason to kind of stick to, because you've got to be certain that what you do is legitimate and true to who you are. Simplicity is good, because if it's complex or kind of woolly, it just doubles your job. Inspiring, are people going to say, yeah, I want me some of that? That's good. And a good brand should inspire people. Is it original to you? Is it unique to you? The last two are kind of important, and these are kind of the toughest ones. Is it brave? Is it something that you will fall on your sword for? Is it unafraid to act in accordance with your beliefs, even when it's unpopular? That you sometimes say, no, we don't do that because that's not who we are. And then finally, a powerful brand has allies, but also has enemies as well. You have natural enemies, something that you're fighting against, something that keeps people involved, something that keeps you relevant, because for whatever your organization is, you're always having to battle against something. And that's what keeps you relevant and keeps your communications exciting. Second step, and to move through this quickly, is choosing your battles wisely. Limited budgets, no budget, means that you have to be very careful where you do spend your money. And what you don't want to do is try and do too many things half-heartedly. It's much better to do one thing brilliantly than a bunch of things kind of meh, half-heartedly. And really there's kind of 7 questions to ask as you approach a piece of communication. I'm not going to dwell too many on these. The first is, what are you trying to achieve? And does that fit with your brand? Because if it doesn't fit with your brand, then you really shouldn't be doing it. Who do you have to win with? What's stopping them from already using you or doing what you want them to do? What unmet need for these people can you satisfy? people don't change behavior unless they need to. Inertia is a very strong force. We'll stay in that rut until somebody kicks us out. So for us to kind of change their behaviors, we need to satisfy some unmet need that they currently aren't getting satisfied somewhere else. We need to ask the questions, how will communication help? And if communication isn't going to help, then we really shouldn't be having the conversation. That's like a stop and do something else. And then what exactly can we share with them? Because it is communication. And then the where's and when. I said, keep it simple. These are tough questions to answer. But at the end of the day, I said, I believe strategy is sacrifice, and it's doing one thing, few things well versus many things poorly. The third step, and Matthew's kind of already spoken about this, is when it comes to sharing your stories or who you are and what you're doing and what you're planning, storytelling is a great tool. And at the end of the day, we're saying tell a great story. And part of telling a great story is actually having a conflict, because conflict creates attention and interest and relevance for people. And we'll get onto that in kind of a bit. But what we do know is that great communications depend on great storytelling. And I love this quote from Maya Angelou. People will forget what you said, people will forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel. And that's what stories do. Stories make you feel, and when people are feeling things, they're far more likely to align with you. Stories are great because they take complex things and they kind of make them simple and real. They teach us lessons. We were talking about, the parables in the Bible. They're all stories and they're there to teach us a lesson. They're there to make complex issues simple. It's interesting. If you just give facts, well, facts are regurgitated. But a good story is retold because it's meant something to somebody and it's worth sharing. And at the end of the day, communications help us make sense of the world we live in. And stories give us a great tool to kind of draw people closer to us because we can talk about emotions or share emotions. I've spoken about how tension and conflict is an important part of storytelling. This is where Celine Dion comes in. Titanic. That is actually a classic conflict between man's hubris. We built this unsinkable ship, the greatest ship in the world, versus nature's might, a whacking great big iceberg. By the way, the iceberg wins in that one. The Simpsons is a classic battle of ambition. Homer's always trying to do something greater than what he's actually able to. So ambition versus ability. The classic Roadrunner versus Wile E. Coyote. That's a battle between naivety of the Roadrunner and the cunning of the Coyote. And it's the same story they tell every single episode. It's the same battle, but it's told in like new and interesting ways. What's good about looking at your communications, framing them through some type of conflict, is that it allows you to show your strengths. When you're involved in a conflict, your true strengths are kind of revealed. And what you're fighting against kind of sets the stage for what you're fighting for. We're not saying that you have to do negative bash communications, but there has to be a knowledge that you are against something and for something. I think Trike is a great example. We did a lot of work with Paul and his team to understand that there's this classic battle that Trike Theatre is kind of involved in, which is allowing people to discover their true authentic selves in a world that is trying to conform them into whatever convention the world feels that they need to belong to. And it's a classic battle, and Trike is there to be on the kids' side. And this is another tool we use for branding, because the noble purpose for Trike is to help any authenticity-seeking young person discover what makes them great. And it's all about pushing back against the conventions and giving kids the space to really explore who they are. And you can see that in the work we did for Trike Theatre, Find Your Character. Matthew, I'm going to hand over to you. You can talk a little bit about where that conflict kind of comes in. I don't just mean because they're fighting, but there's an underlying theme there.
Well, sure, and again, I mean, there is something to be said for the arena that that Trike operates in of Northwest Arkansas, which is, as we were, when we were briefed, we were described a very kind of, tends to be a sport heavy area that leans heavily on that tradition, particularly football and probably baseball somewhat too. And it didn't leave a lot of room for those people, even football and baseball players, who had a need for a different outlet. And in doing so, we kind of came up with this story. And I just want to say this is that brands really are stories. They're not just things, they are stories. They have a beginning, middle, and an end eventually, but hopefully you can make that middle go a long time. And the story here was that it's much more than just a place to go and be entertained. It's a place to go find out what you're capable of and really what you love. I think in one of one of the pieces that we always would go back to for this creative was a line that Ed had, is where kids can show they're great, and use both terms of that. Help any authenticity seeking young person discover their great. One is a noun, one is a adverb. So it does double duty in that. So Ed, sorry, can you just go back to the creative? So what we kind of created was, these truly exuberant little children explaining what they've been doing and what they've learned at Trike. So when they say, I am King Arthur in Camelot, yeah, that's who they are on stage playing, but they are, and I am creative, intense, and marvelous, especially in my outdoor voice. We're still celebrating the fact that they're children and that they've got things about themselves to discover. So the idea of I am was really something that embodied, and I think Paul, who's on the chat, can I think corroborate. It embodied something that they were already employing in the I am trike notion. But that's where we came with this tagline of find your character. Obviously, you can come there and play, Mr. Smee is in Peter Pan or King Arthur in Camelot and find that character. But more importantly, you can find your internal character, the person that you are, the one with the soft voice, but the great ideas, and things like that. So it was in these images and in the words that we're telling. There again is the brand story is all in there. And I just want to iterate, you rarely will see any communications in the form that you're looking at them here. What we refer to these as ad-like objects, and what we create them for the purpose of showing the brand idea in its purest form. So it is quite simply this, exuberant children acting out a play while they're also discovering something about themselves.
Yeah, so this is what we'll call a concept, and there were many different versions of this that came to life. But along with this, you'll get sort of a bit of a photography treatment, a copy platform. So how do we sound? And then you'll roll that out. So if you'll look at Trike's website or the APO website, you'll see lots of different applications of this, but it's consistent across the board. Although the images are different, the tone is the same. And again, what makes or breaks a brand is time, consistency, and management. So making sure that you're really tight on what that Bible is and what you're about is going to make sure that whoever you end up working with, a creative partner, a media partner, whatever, you're going to get a consistent level of communications and brand exposure across the board. So that's the important piece.
So this is kind of theory, but there's a lot of practical matters that need to be addressed as well. Tina, do you want to quickly run through this just in terms of what the roadmap actually looks like?
Sure, yeah. So I'm the practical arm of this team. So there's usually, with most clients, there's kind of two trains that we start on. So there's a team in the process that Ed and Matthew walked you through to really understand the brand and identify, who the organization is and start bringing that to life. through copy and through imagery and what that's going to be. Simultaneously, my little train goes along and usually starts with an audit, because part of it is, in order to bring any of this to life, you need to understand, if your marketing foundation is ready for it. So oftentimes, the website is old or poor, difficult to update or make changes to. There may be a, clunky CRM or none at all, a bunch of spreadsheets in different offices and different places. There may be, lots of inconsistent arms that go in and post things in social. So really trying to understand what the footprint is, at the moment, what activities are being worked on, what state they're in, how much data, how clean is the data, to really understand what we're working with. And then part of that roadmap is understanding, how to get the organization to a place of success. And so the timeline you see here on the slide on the right hand is a sort of an abridged. There's probably 87 other steps in there, but it's sort of, we started with, kind of in 2020 July, Jason saying, like, where should I spend my media dollars? That was kind of the initial ask that came through, which is very typical. I need to fundraise more, I need to get more members. It's usually kind of the ask comes from a very tactical kind of place. And as we dig in, we start to understand what's missing in the foundation. So certainly brand strategy and blueprint is the first place to start. But simultaneously, doing the audit and then understanding what needs to happen in the digital space. So, by, a year later, we had launched the new website and CRM, and we actively went out to the universe of the APO in a brand relaunch campaign. Then, all of that was really just to kind of get set up and be able to do the things that the APO wanted us to do. Sort of fast forward a little bit to the phase that we're in, which is, we're calling to monetize. All that work in the beginning really allowed us to launch a bunch of things that were kind of part of the initial ask, but we were like, you're not really ready for this. And so, we're actively launching a corporate partnership campaign and looking to bring corporate partners and other sources of revenue into the organization. We've expanded the CRM, and we've just recently launched a donor management system, so a full fundraising CRM. That didn't exist before for the APO. And then we've just launched in July, we're also a recurring membership program. So shifting from sort of one-time large donors, but looking at other ways for our loyal audiences to engage, as well as looking at local partner co-marketing. So other organizations within the region that APO and Jason already have great relationships with, how can we share each other's audiences and help cross-promote and co-market to each other's audiences? Because at the end of the day, the APO is an organization that is made up of these partnerships that exist nationally within Northwest Arkansas and the arts community. So that part of that road mapping is how you get from the, where should I spend my media dollars to, several revenue generating strategies. That's really part of the process that I help the team navigate through. And again, it can take 2 months, it can take 2 years, it can take 20 years. I mean, the pace at, Michael's like, not 20 years. The pace at which, you can manage that is really dictated by the organization and the state that you're in. And if you have a lot to transform, that takes more time. If you have very, very small budgets or non-existent budgets, that takes more time. But it doesn't mean that you can't get there. And to Ed's point earlier around, strategy and, a sacrifice, being very, very focused, understanding who you are and where you're going and what you want to create is that key part. And otherwise, you're just kind of throwing stuff out there and that isn't, as coordinated or isn't as focused on that end goal that you're trying to get to. So, how you actually get there, is less important in knowing where you want to go. And so the little chart on the left there, it was really just kind of how we looked at budgeting with the APO, where, in the past, again, the ask was, where should I spend my media dollars? And I said, well, maybe media isn't where you should be spending it today. And so there was an initial investment in strategy and creative production, CRM, to kind of get everything up to where it needed to be and relaunching the website. But that initial investment then declines. We end up in a maintenance mode where there's still work being done, but not at the same scale or the same effort that was required. And then you start to ramp up on the monetization. But your ability to monetize at this point is very, very different because you have the tools, you have the foundation, and you have that North Star. And, for us on the executional side, I mean, it makes our jobs much easier because we can make decisions on where we need to advertise. We can make decisions on what the ads should look like. We can, decide if a particular partnership, opportunity or an advertising opportunity makes sense. Is it aligned with the brand? Is it reaching the right people? Is it where we should be? Does it reinforce this roadmap, or is it a distraction? And that's a sacrifice bit. You don't have to do everything, but make sure you do the most important things so that you're continuing to kind of swim in that same direction, that you have that North Star, you have that focus. There's also a bit of like we try to teach people to fish. We don't really want anyone to be dependent on us. So I think what Tina usually does on a fairly regular basis is, and I don't mean this like in a pejorative way, but there's a training wheel component. So Tina will partner very closely with whoever your head of ops or marketing or whoever's just kind of in the day-to-day. She'll partner with them, and then, bit by bit, our partners will become a little less reliant on what we've done. But we're not going to do this big shakeup and then just, kind of wash our hands. But in the end, we also don't really want to. We don't want anyone to be reliant on us either.
I had a good question in the chat, just something you just said, Tina, about how that's why it's so critical. Like all of this is directed by that North Star. So I had a question in the chat. What's the difference between a North Star and a mission statement? Because I don't know if many organizations that are either listening to this recording or here present today have done a North Star exercise necessarily.
You, Ed? You want to do that, Ed?
Oh, yes, it's a really good question. There are so many different words and flying around: brand purpose, North Star, brand essence, brand goal, brand vision. A lot of them overlap. Traditionally, most organizations will have what we use is the blueprint, which is a purpose, which is very much, why do we do this? What is driving us? A mission, which is, this is what we're trying to do. Our mission is to X, and I can actually I'll just show you on the APO example. There we are. And a vision, and it's a vision of what will the world look like when we succeed. So for the mission is, well, our mission is to introduce art in unexpected ways. Our purpose is such that we will connect communities via our mission. And our vision is that if we do it really, really well, we'll have a world where all this kind of happens.
And you have sort of two types of visions, like tangible and intangible. And there are a lot of organizations out there that have tangible visions, like metric-driven visions, but they're not inspiring. And if you look at Ed's checklist, I mean, the goal of a vision is to inspire, and then the mission is what you do every day to accomplish that vision.
Does that answer your question, I hope?
Yeah, I'm thinking about organizations that say, okay, I have a mission statement. Well, and here, this kind of fits into another question. For those who may be a medium-sized organization, but don't necessarily have a communications committed staff member, they're wondering, how can we find the time to take on a brand identity and storytelling project? Is having a mission statement a good enough start? What do we do if we have so much going on?
Michael, I'm going to let you handle that one, because it's a question of how much can we help out.
Yeah,
it doesn't have to take forever, but it does involve quite a bit of navel gazing.
A bit of navel gazing, and then don't let perfection be the enemy of progress. I think that's a big thing. You can get to what we call bad ideas, and regularly we ask Jason for bad copy. Like give us the stuff that's not perfect, but helps us get a little bit of insight into the way that you're thinking. And then we can take whatever that is and we continue to massage it and work with it and what have you. But it doesn't need to be perfect right off the bat. We can start to think about that sort of noble purpose or higher order goal for your company. And then we start to shape it in terms of, well, how does that differentiate you from somebody else who might do something very similar to you? And then what does that mean for what you do every single day, every week, every quarter to accomplish that goal? But I'd say your first step is typically just finding someone who you can do this with out loud. Like, it's very hard to just do on your own. I find like really well-written briefs kind of make the round, or you meet with people or you talk people through it. So, typically what I offer is I'm happy to meet with anyone over coffee or breakfast or lunch or whatever, and just help untangle some thinking, because sometimes it's just a few questions that send people down the right path and help them fine tune what they're thinking.
If I might chime in here too, I think it's important to say is that brands aren't a stake in the ground. They're meant to live. They're living, breathing things. Of course, you need to kind of set it off in motion and start from someplace, and that's where all these leading questions that Ed's been talking about come in. There are questions, important questions that you have to answer about who you are and what you're doing. But at the end of the day, if one thing has become evident, particularly in the digital age, is that companies no longer really own their brands. So once you create who you are and what you are, what your purpose is, it's really important to stay vigilant about what your customers, what your patrons, what people are saying about you, what they want you to be, so that you're able to, I'm not talking about sea changes, but you're able to pivot on what they're thinking. Because I mean, a lot of recent research has said that people will accept brands more for what they believe than what they offer. Or often they'll go for what they believe than what they offer, and probably even more importantly for a not-for-profit. So I don't think that when you're sitting down thinking, okay, well, who are we and what are we doing, that you are sewing it into a bag and that's it, nothing's coming out. You still get to work on it. You still get to evolve it as it goes along. Coke isn't the same brand it was when it started. Neither is pretty much anybody else. IBM's a perfect example. They used to make computers. They don't anymore. So they had to change.
Just adding to, I think the place where, nonprofits in particular get stuck is kind of that place where it's like, well, we have to go out and fundraise. We can't spend time over here. We have to, do this event. We have to do these things. And I think the part that, and again, Paul or Jason can certainly contribute to this conversation, is we try to help you filter to what's most important. And so, you're still going to be writing letters, you're still going to be sending emails, you're still going to be running events. But what if you were able to do those in a way that was more focused and more targeted and spoke to your audience better, engage them in a different way? Think about, the impact that it would have when you could measure it in a different way that maybe you can't today, to understand the return for the efforts that you have. When you're armed with that information, you're armed with that blueprint, and you're armed with that North Star and that focus, your ability to be effective in the time that you spend changes pretty dramatically. And I think that's the transformative piece that can be brought into an organization. So, when you're already, time strapped and overworked and, have a million things to do, if you can filter out 50% of it that isn't actually working for you or being effective, or, you can focus in on those things that really are making a difference. The impact you can have not only on the community you serve, at the end of the day, the goal that you have for your organization and the community that's relying on you, you can be more impactful in your efforts towards them, but also, enlarge your footprint in a different way and help more people and create more awareness around what you do. And that's really the part, for me, that's the part that I love, because it's, seeing how the people can work differently. And certainly, most organizations is that either don't have a marketing person, or they have one person that is part-time marketing, or does, wears all the hats in all the places. And if you can kind of focus that effort in a bit of a different way, it changes your ability to see change and see impact in your organization.
I've got another question just about expressing that impact. Is what do you do when you have a team that have many different perspectives about what the organization means to them, what impact it's made on them? How do you honor those stories in your organization, whether it's team or volunteers or board members? How do you keep a unified and focused message about your brand and who you are?
And that is why having a brand blueprint or a true north, or whatever your definition is so important. Because once you've worked with people, and again, it's involving the stakeholders. Once you've heard the stakeholders and they have their input, they have their kind of say, what you craft should be able to avoid any arguments, because typically those arguments are kind of petty, small things. They are not petty. I mean, they're about small issues. They aren't about the big stuff that your brand stands for. But at the end of the day, everybody has to be buying into the same brand story, because if they aren't, then you're going to get different stories happening in different parts. That's why having a brand purpose and a brand blueprint that everyone can say, yes, that's us, that's what we are commit to, makes every effort after that so much more powerful. Singing from the same song sheet.
And I think, Kelsey, there's a little bit in there about, people's instinct is to want to be all things to all people. And the fact is, nobody can be all things to all people, but you can be one thing to all people. Doesn't mean they're all going to be customers or patrons, but you have to be one thing to all those people. It's a lot of, of where, from a creative perspective, where we come from, when we're trying to get a message out, it's much, much easier to tell one message than it is to say 5 messages in one thing. So the same goes for a brand. It's hard to stand for 5 things. Some do, some try to, but those are the brands that people are ambivalent about. And that's the worst thing you can be. I'd rather be hated than love, than be somebody forget about me, because at least I can use that to develop my brand. If they're ambivalent, I don't know where I'm going. But it's usually those brands you can look at and say, well, they're this, they're this, they're this. The most important thing is to have a singular vision. Often you can come to that if it's not evident at the outset. You can often come to it by a process of elimination, by defining, okay, which priority, you whittle it down to 2 things. This is really important. This is really important, but one of them's even more important than the other. And often enough, that will be the place where you need to go.
Is anybody in the room feeling daunted by that? I'm just curious, like, put what's a good letter? Put the letter E in the chat if you feel like, oh yeah, we know that one thing that defines us. Put the letter F in the chat if you feel like you're struggling with 5 stories. Curious where we're at. Don't be shy. Put a letter E in the chat if you're feeling like, yep, we've got our one thing. Letter F if you're like, we're still struggling to tell those 5 stories at once. Okay, thanks, David. Thanks, Emily. Paul, that is cheating, but that's whatever.
I think it's also iron.
Yeah, I was thinking that, yeah.
Yeah. Well, with just, a handful of minutes left, I want to make sure that, thank you for the involvement in the chat, everybody. I want to make sure if anybody has any questions that you're given the time to speak up. So I may have just frozen. So I'm going to hand it over to Brittany if you can hear me to continue. Oh, I'm back. Sorry about that. Internet unstable. Yeah, I'm just wondering, can I pick on one of you to react? What are questions that you've got? I am going to just pick somebody if no one speaks up. So what are your burning questions? David, you're smirking, so I'm going to call on you. What are y'all thinking right now? What are your questions? Oh, you're conveniently muted right now, David. Yeah. Let me ask you this. What do you feel like you need to work on next in response to this session?
For us, it's just further distilling down that core. I mean, we pretty much know what our core is, but really presenting it in bite-sized pieces that people will connect with best. I think most people know who we are, where we are, and what we're about, but it's just defining it more succinctly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
and going through this process to do it.
I think that's actually an interesting thing in terms of how to disseminate a brand. When we, through Tina and Michael and Ed and myself and my partner Stephen, we're always looking for the ways to make it the most digestible way to put the brand out there. When you look at a chart like Ed has presented, it can look daunting because there are visions on there, missions, and all these different things, and it's a lot of words. And then, of course, it does eventually filter down to where Stephen and I have to make it, like I said, that little bit of a story that gives you a little bit of that brand. And so all of that upfront work, that it was really where all the sweat goes in. It is asking those hard questions and sitting in a room and trying to figure out where we need to go. It's a little bit like equipping a ship. Sailing the ship is easy. It's getting the ship together, the crew, all that kind of stuff. So, but it is right. You have to kind of figure out the little bits of digestible, little nuggets of gold that people will grasp on, that will make them sit up and take notice of your brand. And again, we have so many different channels and avenues to be able to do that now. Even that's a tough thing to do, more so than what you're going to say once you have your brand locked in. It's just a matter of how to get to those people. That I would rather that be harder than what the brand is going to be, or getting the brand out to them.
I feel like that's our next step. I feel like a lot of us, we're so passionate about the organizations that we're a part of. How do we move from this awareness of our organization, or distilling what your awareness is, and figuring out how to share it to the masses in a way that is digestible? I liked how you said that, Matthew. So it is a daunting thing, and we as nonprofit leaders often feel like we must wear all the hats with great finesse and do all the things very, very well, but we all know that that's not possible. And so Michael had said earlier, have somebody to talk this through with. And we'd like to offer everybody that's participating in this some time to have some one-on-one time with Michael and his and I think he only voluntold himself, so I won't say that it's with the rest of the team. But
we know what you meant.
Yes. So please direct message me your email address right now. And if you would like to meet with him one-on-one for a little bit, for free, of course, and just start this process, we want to help point you in the direction of what works for the scale of your organization. How can we think through some realistic next steps for you to even just work with your board and work with some of your staff to distill your story and come up with some measurable, manageable next steps to really hone in on this story that you must tell people. It's a story worth telling, and we want to do it well.